Getting the early numbers could be the key to success when betting on the NFL. That's why we're here to react to the Pinnacle openers and analyse where the market might move. Welcome to the opening line. The opening line is here for week 8 and we're ready to take a look at the early numbers at Pinnacle. Here to help with some in-depth market analysis, as they always are Andy Molitor, Eric Eager and Rufus Peabody. Well, guys, I hope you're all well. We'll start as we normally do with a little look back at the previous week. Andy, I'll go over to you first. How was week 7 for you?
A couple rough ones. Mostly, I did double dip a little when it dropped, but I had some Steelers over 52, which felt pretty bad after the market went the other way. And I don't know, the books apparently got middled on like a 1.5 move, which is wild to begin with, because it did go to 50.5. But closed nice last night. I had the under, kind of a rocking chair under, and we took some Rams second half. So I'm just gonna let the recency wash over me and remember what happened in the most recent game and feel pretty good. So overall, a decent week.
And Rufus, the Jets delivered the goods with the cover at last. How was the rest of the weekend?
The Jets finally did cover, and I actually hit a middle because I had Buffalo second half -7. So that was one of the few highlights of the weekend, at least on the football front for me. Golf's a different story, but Saints didn't do it for me, unfortunately. I played one total and it lost. I had Cincinnati, Cleveland under 51.5, and actually no, I only got under 51. Sorry. That did not come through despite a solid start. And San Francisco won. A little Tennessee +2 didn't win. And Jaguars I got a little +10. I'm not sure if that was a look ahead. My partner logs this stuff. So, but that was a little disappointing because they were up a touchdown in the third quarter, and then there's that fumble on the kick return. So that was a disappointing loss. But basically, I was down like 1.5 units or so.
So a bit of a mixed bag for Andy and Rufus. What about yourself, Eric?
It wasn't great. I like San Francisco late. Once that thing got to 3, I thought that was a good play. I got ripped for saying that Shanahan was currently Belichick's equal as a tactician, and people I think saw that was maybe the case. But I had Atlanta, which Todd Gurley's fall down into the end zone I thought was going to get me, to the cover, and then of course they do what the Falcons do. I was actually on Tennessee, which again, another one where it wasn't great, and the Jags. So those 3 were a little rough. But it is what it is. Those ones ended up being kind of coin flips after all was said and done.
All right, well, let's get on to week 8 then and see where you guys are at for that. You mentioned the Falcons there. They're our first game. Falcons at the Carolina Panthers. Bit of a move on Atlanta here, with the Panthers coming off -3 down to -2.5. Totals dropped along with that. It's 51 down to 49. As you mentioned there, Erica, another close one for Atlanta at the weekend. This one's also a rematch from week 5, I think, as well. Panthers came out on top of that. Who wants to kick us off here? Eric, maybe with you. You got the disappointment with Atlanta. So how are you feeling about this one now?
I think the number's right. I can see why people are grabbing Atlanta, but the interesting thing, we talked about this last week when it came to the Detroit Atlanta total. That was in the mid 50s, and we all talked about how in the perfect world both of those teams want to play slow, and we saw that. We saw a ton of Adrian Peterson carries. We saw a ton of Todd Gurley early down carries, and that game it barely got to the mid 40s after 2 touchdowns in the last minute or so. So this total here is at 49, which is relatively small for 2 teams that are decent quarterback play. And I think I sort of support that. I mean, Carolina had 7 possessions against New Orleans. They basically just want to grind out a game. So I think this is actually going to be more boring on Thursday night than people give it credit for. I think that the side, the number, the spread, and the total are probably pretty on here.
And Rufus?
I support the move down as well. When I looked at that box score, and it's funny, I didn't watch much of the Lions game. I wasn't involved. But then once things got interesting, I paid attention to the end. And then I get into the box score, and the first thing you roll down and you see Stafford goes for 340, Ryan essentially goes for the same. And you look at the score, I'm like, God, was this a bad luck under? And then you get down to neither team just really was able to run the ball. If you look at the total yardage and break down everything, I guess it's probably pretty nuts on for how many points should have been scored in that game. And you had a last second touchdown even to tack on. So kind of a goofy game. I've said this a couple times now. I'm super happy that a team let another team score in a position where and the fact that they won makes it so much better, because then coaches won't say, oh, that was stupid, or the media won't pan them. I'm happy that they did that, because otherwise they'd have just watched them kick a last second 20-yard field goal and never had a chance. So good for the Lions. I didn't have anything in that game, and I rarely will with these Atlanta teams, because I'm still making sense of it. Like I said, that I probably pretty much agree with Eric on this. Numbers pretty close to being on. Carolina, if I had to take a side, though, it would probably be Carolina. I don't think much of the Saints defense anymore. I've continually had to downgrade them, even though I want them to, I don't know if I can will them to be good. It hasn't worked so far. But Carolina was extremely efficient again, and they probably get a weapon back here soon. So it's going to be, as soon as the Bears start to fall off, the South and the West might have 3 playoff teams in.
Yeah, I actually was watching the ending of that game with Preston, our friend, the bearded friend, because I was in LA, and he had a position on Detroit, and was we watched that Gurley stumble fall. I think Gurley was trying to stop. Remember when he stopped?
Yeah.
He was definitely trying to stop. It wasn't that he just realized it. I think he broke that tackle, that sort of half-hearted attempt at a tackle, but that kind of took him a few yards further than I think he thought he was. But I'll say this, though. Still, at that point, I was like, what defense would you rather be against if you're Detroit than Atlanta right there? I mean, think about how many times in the last few years they've given up scoring drives in the last 20 seconds of games, when you thought that they had Atlanta just scored the game-winning touchdown or field goal or whatever. And it feels like it happens every few weeks, or at least it did when Atlanta was good enough to really be in contention a little more. So that said, for this week, I actually took Atlanta +3 yesterday, +3 -116. I don't like doing that. I think I'm a little low in Carolina, but I think, again, that's the coaching staff. Matt Rule's done a tremendous job there, Joe Brady in the offense, and the defense has been a little bit better than expected as well. And so I think I'm probably a little bit slow to adjust there. But I still think that, my number has Carolina as less than a point favorite, but I still think, even though I do think my number is a little low on them, I think it might be up -2, but my numbers don't really justify the line of 3, and I kind of expected that we might see some movement down. But Carolina has been awfully impressive. I agree with what you guys have said.
Brady has the best offensive play caller metric of any guy in the league. He's getting the most out of the talent that he has been given than anybody else in football. It's pretty good. Rufus, I think, interestingly, with Carolina's defense, I think that the outcomes have been better because they are protecting their defense by playing fewer, drawing out possessions so that their defense is on the field less. And I think that there's going to be a game where a really good offense takes advantage of that. But Atlanta's not that offense. Atlanta's going to run on early downs, slow the game down, force Matt Ryan to throw on late possessions. And generally speaking, they've been efficient throwing the football, but the bar's too high, right? 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7, you can get a 6-yard pass, which is good on early downs and not good enough on late downs. And that's kind of the story of the Falcons. So I think for another week, we're going to be talking about how Carolina's defense is, punching above their weight class.
All right, we'll move on to the next game. We've got the Indianapolis Colts, the Detroit Lions. I've got the benefit here of being able to look into the numbers behind what you see on the Pinnacle website, and I can tell you there's limited interest in this one so far at the numbers. The spread's at -2.5 with the Colts as the favourites. Total has dropped slightly from 50 to 51. Now, Eric, I went with you first. Andy, I'll start with you on this one. Do you think there's not much betting interest in this because the traders have got it spot on, or is it one that it's just not an interesting matchup for people?
Maybe a little both columns. What do you make of Detroit, a team, Eric had kind of talked to both teams where not particularly great at running the ball, but determined to do it anyway. And especially with some of the weapons they have in Detroit, like I feel like I'm yelling at my teenager. I don't even have a teenager, but like you have so much potential. Like Galladay's a stud. You have several good receivers. You have a good tight end, and you're just bound and determined to give Adrian Peterson the ball over and over. Where, God, he had over 10 carries again. So I want to back a team like this who has so much potential, but it's not fleshing itself out on paper or in the results, I guess. So Indy is kind of in a nice spot here, even on the road. It's indoors. I found a tweet a little bit ago. It looks like the Indy has made some moves that are kind of indicative of Darius Leonard probably coming back, which would be huge. That was a big problem, especially, God, what was it? The Cleveland game where just huge void in the middle of the field where they were picking on the everybody in the secondary really. And I think getting him back would be very important. And if that's the game plan Detroit wants to call, I'm probably gonna have to take some Indianapolis here if it's cheap. But I'm waiting for news on that. And then I don't know what else I had for notes on Detroit. It was a good passing game, but against a really suspect D. And I think it's a big step up in class even coming home. So slight lean to Indy. Haven't played anything here. The total is probably total's 50. That's fair. Like I haven't run total stuff a lot yet. That's probably where I'm going to have it though.
So minimal interest, I think, from Andy as well as the market. Eric, what about yourself?
I agree. I think the spot's good for Indianapolis. Getting back their middle linebacker, which, was not as big of a deal for Pittsburgh maybe as we thought, but I think Tennessee sort of played into it a little bit. I don't know if Detroit's going to be able to do the things that they want to do in this game, basically going down the football field. Indianapolis is a team that will let you bleed them into the red zone and then kick field goals. They're not a team that's just going to let you throw, YOLO passes to Galladay and Jones, like Detroit wants to. So I think a lot of this game is going to be Detroit running the ball in early downs, DeForest Buckner, Justin Houston, Darius Leonard sort of containing that, and then Stafford getting into long yardage situations and playing exactly into what Indianapolis likes to do defensively, which is keep things in front of them and be the best tackling team in football. So in that regard, I think Detroit's going to probably be more neutralized than normal in this game. And then it just comes down to Phillip Rivers, who I think played extremely well indoors 2 weeks ago against Cincinnati. I think Detroit's equally weak defensively as the Bengals are. So I think this looks okay for Indianapolis coming off the bye.
Yeah, I don't have much interest in this game personally. If anything, I lean towards Indy, surprisingly, on road favorite. I make it minus 3.8. Indy coming off the bye. Echo what you guys said. It's a good spot for them. I think Detroit played well last week. I had them, 12th best game performance out of the 28 teams. So nothing to write home about, but it's an improvement from where they have been. And if anything, I would lean towards the under here. I make it right around 47. So, but I'm not betting. I'm personally not betting it. I'm using a little bit of a bigger threshold right now on the total stuff, especially for unders, given the fact that I'm still shading myself a little bit under. But.
Consensus on Indy, we like that nonetheless. Anyway, one game that there might split the opinion is the next one: Minnesota Vikings at the Green Bay Packers. The market wasn't too keen on Green Bay at this one. They -7 dropped to -6.5. It's another one where maybe the total was a little too high. Early money has dropped from 55.5 to 54.5. I don't know with this one. Aaron Rodgers kind of started hot, had one bad game. He seemed to come back again and is looking good. Rufus, I'll start with you on this one. Do you think Green Bay have got it in them to cover?
No, I don't. I actually took Minnesota +7 yesterday. So I'm on the right side of that line move so far. It's one of those things, again, like it's which Green Bay team are we getting? Are we getting the team they've basically been this season, the offense they've been this season, or do we still look at what Aaron Rodgers has done last season? And so you look 2 weeks ago against Tampa Bay, they played very poorly. They were, I guess I had them graded as number 21 of 24 teams. They didn't run the game grades after the Monday night game. So the first 24 games, and then they were the second best performance last week. But you do have Minnesota coming off of a bye, and Minnesota is a team that I think has been a little bit less than the sum of their parts so far this season. They've certainly been unlucky on the turnover front, negative 14 points there, whereas Green Bay has been a slight beneficiary. So I'm happy to take the +7 there and basically rely on the fact that Green Bay is not as good as they have played so far this season.
This was an interesting one on my podcast Sunday night. Like, we thought that this number would go out towards Green Bay. But in fact, like, now that, we run everything with, especially with the injury reports, there is some value on the Vikings, even at 6.5. And I think the reason is you look at Green Bay, Aaron Jones is obviously one of their, contributors on defense. They have Kevin King, Darnell Savage didn't play a week ago, still sort of questionable. Their left tackle, David Bakhtiari, is injured. And then Tyler Ervin, who's kind of a Swiss Army knife for them, all hurt. Meanwhile, the Vikings coming off of a bye, getting a little healthy with Pat Elflein coming off of IR, Troy Dye coming off of IR. And, to Rufus's point, like, the Vikings, I think you look at their underlying metrics. I mean, Kirk Cousins is not a quarterback I ever sort of want to build a team around. But you come up for water every single game, highest average depth of target in the NFL. He's actually grading pretty well by our metrics. And, it's just kind of, those are types of teams where, like, I think there's probably value on them if you just, the random person looking at, wins and losses, even points for and points against, and, others looking at the constituent pieces and saying, if these things come together, this could be a pretty decent game. It also would be quintessential Vikings, having growing up there, for them to play poorly against Atlanta and the next week against Detroit, and just to get the hopes up to play a decent game against Green Bay.
That would be
right, Andy?
Kind of what they do. That would be 100% what they do. I am interested. Quick question for Eric. Do you wash anything out on the average depth of target, or is that 100% of passes, no matter win probability, garbage times in there, everything?
No, that's everything. Although throwaways are given a 0. So, like, if you throw, like, that is actually sprinkled in there.
Gotcha. It would be interesting just because of the game states
having more throwaways.
Having more throwaways would make your depth of target worse, yeah. Because the issue is it's basically what you want to do is look at. So one of the stats that we use is, like, percentage of air yards converted to receiving yards. Yeah. And so Cousins there is 0.88. So for every air yard he's throwing, the air yards have to kind of have potential, and a throwaway doesn't have any potential. So that's why we sort of give it a 0. But of his air yards, he's essentially getting about 9/10 of an actual yard, which is, a little bit less than some of these, really good quarterbacks. Rodgers is at about 1, but his average depth of target's lower. So, with Cousins, it's one of those where you look at his negative plays, and almost a third of them are turnover worthy, which is kind of noisy. So if he just reduces that a little bit, they're in more football games. And I think it's kind of a product of luck so far that the Vikings have kind of tanked their ability to win at least 3 or 4 of their games almost out of the gate.
Well, yeah, you throw 3 picks in the first half, and Rufus had brought up the points off turnovers. Just like that game got out of hand in a hurry, and it was amazing that the Falcons weren't up more at halftime. I made it probably a little slight value on Minnesota, just if I put in the bye and whatever I'm doing for home field for Green Bay right now. And I don't mind taking the 7 points, but at the same time, I'm probably off of it just because I think if you go back, a big part of the Tampa Bay game was Arians' game plan, and when they were able to pressure Rodgers, and then when he got into that negative game script, it was a lot worse, and they were able to make him uncomfortable. And Minnesota never getting Danielle Hunter back now, traded away Ngakoue, lost some linebacker depth. Like the defense, they are getting some pieces back on the other side, but if you don't have any edge rushers and Rodgers is comfortable the whole time, this one could get out of hand. So I'm probably not going against my numbers and taking some Green Bay. Well, depends how low it goes. If this drops precipitously, we're have to think about Green Bay, but I will probably be staying off of Minnesota. Not only did I miss the best of the 7, but just from an eye test thing, if they're not able to pressure Rodgers, it could be a long day for that Vikings secondary, who is a problem at this point in the year.
I think 100% the who covers this game. if the Vikings cover this game, it's because their offense played well, not because they could stop Rodgers, because they have no one who can pressure the passer at an NFL level, at an NFL caliber level anymore.
Can I ask what you guys make this number?
I have it at. So I see it at 7 now. Okay, it's like a shade under 6.
6.25 ish.
Okay, I have it at 5. But do any of you have an opinion on the total? I see. I mean, it's 54.5, right?
I mean,
did I log this wrong, or is that?
No, that's where it's sitting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that
Sunday?
Everybody else is quite high.
It started higher.
I put
it did come down a little.
Well, so is this driven by the weather? Because I think if it was a good day out in Green Bay, I'd probably think over. But right now the forecast is 40 Fahrenheit with 20-mile-per-hour winds, which I do think hurts. Obviously, like if you're betting over into that kind of weather, there has to be a little bit more of a sig. And I don't know, my number is 53.8. So, but that's after regressing, so it's lower. So, and I think the weather is a big deal with that.
Yeah, if the weather's okay and we get kind of the same sort of game script we saw from the Atlanta game, I wouldn't surprise me to see a second half similarly where Minnesota gets the offense going in hopeless situations and Green Bay is forced to answer just to keep them at arm's length, and all of a sudden you're looking at like a 35-point second half, and with a total probably opening around 28.
But don't you guys think that the Vikings? I mean, both of these teams want to run the football on early downs. Green Bay masks it by having a brilliant quarterback, but to Rufus's point, I do think like this total is maybe a little bit out of control, just because of the way Minnesota does like to if you're gonna if these things are pretty correlated, right? If you're gonna bet Minnesota, you probably want to also think about the under, because if Minnesota's in this football game, it's probably going to be mucked up a little bit. Whereas if you like Green Bay, you probably like the over, to your point, Andy, because Green Bay's defense isn't particularly good, and Minnesota is pretty efficient in these garbage time situations, with scoring the football. So that's kind of where I don't know. I don't think I'd bet the total, but I do think the under is probably the side you'd have to take if you do.
Yeah, maybe correlated a little with Minnesota. And Aaron Jones looks like he's trending towards playing. So I was thinking maybe Green Bay would be a little less apt to run early downs without their star. But if he's back and healthy, they probably will. And that's where I think it might be like a first half under, second half over situation.
Well, let's move on. I was going to say move on to one that's a little bit clear-cut, but it's probably just as uncertain or both sides to have a case made for them. Tennessee Titans at the Cincinnati Bengals. People happy to take the Titans here, -4 to -6 early on. Sound already a bit like a broken record, but another total down 55. I think it's exactly the same move, 55.5 down to 54.5. Eric, I think a lot of the time we talk about the Bengals, we talk about Burrow, encouraging versus kind of elite or good. Is encouraging enough to challenge the Titans here, do you think?
Yeah, I took this at 4.5 for Tennessee, and I think that now it's at 6. It's pretty much the value is gone. But when I look at Burrow's playing well, especially in being behind situations. And the hard thing now, it's like Tennessee really has a hard time stopping the other team. I mean, especially on late downs. I wonder how much of that is noise and how much of that is actually being poor. But the big matchup here that I kind of want to see is going to be the Bengals offensive line, which was, I think, down 3 starters this week, and probably not going to get all of them back this week against Tennessee, who, aside from Jadeveon Clowney, really can't get pressure on the quarterback. That's really where if teams have given Burrow time this year, he's been terrific. Twice as many positively graded throws as negatively graded throws. I think he's reached past the encouraging threshold to the actually good threshold over the last couple weeks. So I don't know. I think at 6 it's really hard to support Tennessee here unless you're sort of you're sort of banking on Derrick Henry to sort of break off a few long runs, which I think is certainly necessary, certainly possible against a team like the Bengals.
And what about you, Andy?
Yeah, I took him at 4, like right away. It was one of those where this is gonna move, and especially, and I don't know, maybe I thought maybe it wouldn't move quite as fast. There might be a hunger for Cincinnati, seeing what they're able to do offensively. But again, it was the Browns. That game was something. Like if you had the Browns minus 3.5, RIP, that sucked. Like just an extra point, really meaningless at the end. It's almost like a walk-off one where you get the 6 points, not the 7. Yeah, but like Eric alluded to, numerous problems. Jonah Williams, that seems like it's going to be long-term-ish. Yeah, so they lost a couple more linemen. The defense is not good. Burrow can only do too much or so much. He's looking great, but it's going to be a lot tougher against a team with a slightly better defense, I guess. I don't know what the Adoree Jackson situation is. I don't like this window shit where they put these guys in this 21-day window where when I don't know if he's even in that. I'm mad about that with several players where you don't get injury designations when these teams return to this window. So it's harder to get updates on people. He'll help. I'm wondering, and I haven't looked too deep into this, if losing Lawan is hurting Derrick Henry a little. Just, I think, you could probably say that without even looking. Just losing a starting lineman isn't going to help your run game, but they were a little less effective on the ground. It was a problem with what Pittsburgh did kind of on early downs and just taking everything underneath. And maybe that's where the pressure wasn't getting there from Tennessee. Not to say that Tennessee has a good pressure unit or has all year, but Pittsburgh was getting rid of the ball quick, doing a lot of short stuff. It's hard to get pressure when Ben's just going to take these 5-yard things through the flat every time. So if they can get a little pressure here, I think they cover this easy. I haven't looked at the total at all. Boy, that's another big one. 55 on that. It's probably like a lot of these 55s I'd probably lean under, and if you get beat on them like you did with the Cincy Cleveland game, so be it. I'm not saying I'd take it, but yeah, I'm pretty happy with the Tennessee position here because it has moved.
I wish I'd gotten that at -4. I make the line -7.1. I didn't get it, but looking at the game against Pittsburgh, I mean Tennessee, I think was clearly outplayed there. I had them basically fundamentally losing by 8 points. They were +3 in turnover margin, and to echo what Andy said, I mean it looks like they really struggled in terms of play success. They were 4th percentile in play success on defense. As you said, Pittsburgh managed to basically stay ahead of schedule. I mean, Pittsburgh and on offense, Tennessee was 24th percentile on play success. So they basically weren't doing the things they needed to do to consistently sustain drives. And basically, I guess what I should say is the backbone predictive metric of being able to sort of sustain drives. And so it's only one game though. So I still think I've been high. Tennessee and Pittsburgh are actually 2 teams that surprisingly I bet overs on before the season, which it surprised me that I liked them given the fact that they seem like 2 teams that were very fortunate and they were successful at the things that you don't expect to be repeatable year to year, which, Tennessee, that's the incredible red zone efficiency they had last year to end the season. I think it was something like 30. I mean, was it 17 of 18 or 37 to 38 or just something absolutely insane.
They had a kicker that was on their roster for half the season that never attempted a field goal.
Yeah. And now they can't make field goals with like one of the great kickers. But and then Pittsburgh, their defense was great last year, but they benefited a ton on the turnover front. I mean, Minkah Fitzpatrick scored more points than a lot of wide receivers. So, but anyway, back to this game. I lean Tennessee. And I think the total, believe it or not, I actually make the total here higher than I do for the Minnesota-Green Bay game. And so I think I'll be on the Minnesota-Green Bay under and definitely not on the Tennessee-Cincy under.
Derrick Henry this season has only had one game with more than 3 yards per carry after contact. I think he's been more neutralized than people think. His numbers season long are inflated by the, 200-yard game with 10 yards per carry. They're not running
90-yard run or whatever.
Right. He's not been as efficient running the football. The thing that happened last week was Tannehill wasn't as good throwing. I mean, and they committed to early down running, and then their third down success wasn't good until probably too late. I don't know if the Bengals will provide such resistance though.
Well, when is Derrick Henry ever efficient early in the season? It seems like it's once the weather gets cold, once teams get tired.
Rufus, you make a good point.
It does seem like this every year. I mean, I've owned him in fantasy I think 2 different seasons, not the right ones, unfortunately, and got very frustrated with that. So and then once I'm basically done with him, that's when he goes off.
So are you saying? So everybody comes back with the whole Henry makes the offense. Everybody says, well, no, actually, it was Tannehill who sparked Derrick Henry. You're saying it's actually the week variable, what week it is. Well, that independent of the QB, maybe even.
I mean, part of it's weather. If you look just historically, I mean, you see more teams pass the ball more early in the season and run the ball later. Part of that's weather, but I think I do think even if you can, don't quote me on this, but even if you control for weather, I do think teams do tend to, even dome teams, run the ball more later in the season. So it might just have to do with defenses being worn down and. I don't know. I mean, Eric, I feel like you guys have probably done some work on this.
Yeah, defenses are more fragile than offenses are. So, injuries, so for example, this week against Cincinnati, DJ Reader's out as a player that they spent a lot of money on in the interior of the defense. And we saw it this week on Twitter with, Brian Burke's thing. It's run defense is more than just about one player, and so if one player goes out, that affects the number of players more so than the offense does. And, that's the thing. I mean, offense gets to dictate where it attacks defenses. And later in the season, in the run game like that, I think there are just more holes in a defense to attack.
He got savaged.
Just looking at the numbers
Dallas
now.
Or him, what was worse?
You kind of mentioned a couple of them dropping down. There's a lot of kind of downward arrows on the totals. I think I probably asked the question for 2 weeks running now about where we are with kind of people's perception of the over and the under. And is it a case of, I feel like last year there was almost this theme around the big spreads, and we had people buying into the underdogs quite a bit, and then that kind of wavered off a little bit. This season it seems to be the totals and the over, and everyone's kind of buying into the over. Now, do you think, Eric, is that something, do you think we're seeing that trend and people maybe now think that right now it's time to buy into the under, or we're at the point where there actually is the value play?
Well, we're actually, I mean, the thing is I think for the first time we're starting to see actual totals that are sort of NFL level totals again. Cincinnati, Cleveland, Seattle notwithstanding, we're starting to find Detroit and Minnesota and Green Bay. We're finally starting to see totals that are in the mid 40s again. The Miami game, Kansas City game. I think the market adjusted the first couple of weeks. I think that just the market didn't necessarily adjust to week 1 or 2, and now I think the market is somewhat adjusted. But now, since we're seeing some unders, it's adjusting down a point or two. Sort of in each game, it feels like.
And Andy, you seem to, there's often a lean to the under from you, but maybe not the willingness to actually take it. Is that changing?
If you don't fully regress to these numbers, I guess you're always going to look at, it used to be, there'd be you'd have 2 good offenses meeting. We got a 54 on the board, and then there'd be 151 and maybe a 50 that got ticked up from 49 earlier. But now, we've probably jumped the shark finally where, scoring is up. When you open 5-6 games at 55, I think we've maybe reached critical mass here, and it's fine. And it's funny, the unders I'm betting are the mid 40s games. I bet the under last night and I didn't even get the best of the number. That opened at 46. It's wild that I'm not willing to take some of these unders on these 55s, even in normal years, or whatever you want to call it, when scoring was lower. It's not like there still weren't 80-point games. It's still just a median scoring average, or however they decide to set this. So I think I'm going to have to get a little ballsier with the unders as we go forward if we're continuing to set 5, 6, 7 games into the 50s here.
Well, what's interesting to me is historically, you mentioned having the 2 great offenses, and normally in a normal year you'd see a total of 54.5. And historically, those extremely high totals there has not been value on the unders. And it's the same thing in college football. They're like extreme totals. I believe it's been 50-50 or a little bit biased towards the over. Whereas, and honestly, it's both college football and the NFL, but in the NFL, historically, the totals like around the 50, like 49, 51, like the mid-range high, but not super high. Those are the ones that where the unders tend to hit more. And I think it's largely because you sort of see there are a few teams that have a huge impact on the total that are pretty extreme. And I think the market is more willing to I guess typecast a team as extreme than they should be. So if you think about it as like a team is either extreme or normal, like the market's like, oh, this team has played these games that might have been a little bit extreme. I'm going to lump them in this extreme category, and suddenly we see a total that's higher. When in reality, they're not fundamentally that team. So I mean that's just a little thought exercise for maybe why, but it's something I noticed. I haven't checked in on it in like the last few seasons, but I know this was the case through like the 2000 to like 2015 or 2016.
All right, then. Well, let's move on to our next game. We've got the New England Patriots at the Buffalo Bills. The Bills are a 4-point favorite. They opened at -4.5. Surprise, surprise. The total's taken a hit, 46 down to 43. I mean, this one, it was a real poor game from Cam Newton against San Francisco. Probably the worst we've seen. I feel like it's been coming as well a little bit. He's coming up against a really good defense. Obviously not going to get much better for him. Bills in the under seems like the obvious one. Rufus, is it as simple as that, do you think?
I don't think so. Actually, I'd lean over, if anything. I think it's a little bit of an overreaction to last week. But what's interesting to me is just how our perception of New England has changed so much throughout this season. At the beginning, we didn't know what we were going to get with Cam Newton. Then suddenly, Cam Newton looks great, although he basically was playing running back. So, and I think I remember saying, you know what, I'm going to be a little bit low on New England, lower than I should be, because we didn't know what Cam Newton we were getting, and then we saw that his shoulder seemed healthy. He seemed to be the playmaker he was in Carolina, but now we're seeing him. And I didn't see the game last week, but you've seen like immense struggles at home against 2 straight weeks against a Denver team that's not that good, and against a San Francisco team that's still very banged up, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So I think it goes to show that what you see for a few game stretch is not necessarily indicative of what you're going to continue to see. And so I don't think you can't really value a team just based on what you last saw. And unfortunately, for that reason too, I think I was on New England second half against San Francisco, and I got I think I laid 3 points. They were down 24 at the half, 21, 24. That didn't come through for me. But for that reason, I mean, I make the spread right exactly at 4, but I don't think we should write off New England just yet, because basically what the data says is that you do see these ups and downs for teams. I mean, we like to create narratives around those ups and downs when it might have just been just a game where the teams came out flat, or like they didn't have a great game plan. And if anybody knows how to sort of, I guess, change course midstream and figure out how to get things working again, McDaniels and Belichick have to be those two guys.
Yeah, I think there's value in New England in this game.
Go on, Eric. Sorry.
Yeah, I think there's value in New England in this game for that reason. And at 43, I can see why people are betting under, because the way the New England wants to play. But Buffalo's defense is not particularly good. I mean, you throw the 2 Jets games out, which you have to do, I think, and Buffalo really hasn't stopped anybody all season. And they're banged up at the linebacker position. They don't really rush the passer very well. They don't stop the run, as the Chiefs showed. A Chiefs kind of a finesse team. Decided to run the football on them on that sort of makeshift Monday night game. Tennessee was able to, have their way with them in that Tuesday night game. I think there's some value here, especially because New England, their forte is making kind of young / iffy quarterbacks look iffy. And one of the key things about the game the other day was that they still were able to get Garoppolo to throw some turnover-worthy plays. And they were, Garoppolo was not the reason that they lost the game. So, I think for this one, it's New England or nothing. Buffalo is a team that I've been impressed with, but only because my opinion of them was a little lower than I think most going into the season. So, I don't think I can support under 43 or Buffalo in this game.
Yeah, for a lot of those same reasons, I probably am going to be betting this over. Like, just looking at the Buffalo game was a little weird, man. They didn't punt. The Buffalo never punted. I don't know if you can even look that up for a team that never punted and scored, what they say, 18
Less
points?
than 20 points.
Yeah. So, 8 field goal attempts, a lost fumble in the end of the game where there are 10 possessions. And to Eric's point, I've been saying that for a couple weeks now. I don't think the defense is very good. But again, like exactly what Eric says, the defense doesn't look like it's some huge liability when you play the Jets without Crowder. Like they got down 10-0, and that was another one where go look what the live lines were. It was still pretty favorable for the Bills. It was still very early, but 11 penalties, just couldn't get it done in the red zone. John Brown hurt. That's getting him back. I think he's trending back. I'm not 100% sure on that. But again, the defense, Milano, I don't know if you had a snap count for him, but he wasn't playing full. He was playing, but it was like only certain downs for some reason, and that's going to just continue to make this defense worse. And honestly, both defenses are bad. You say Garoppolo didn't win that game. Garoppolo was hurt. He's still hurt. They're still playing around that. They just, I'm with you on Shanahan. Like, Shanahan might be the best coach in the league, and he's been dealt. And it's hard to make the case because he's been dealt such a bad hand with all these injuries this year. Like, he's really done it the last 2 weeks for me, coming out with a gimpy ass quarterback and making it happen. So both these defenses are bad, in my opinion, and I think we're going to see a lot better game out of Josh Allen against a defense like this. I'd say, like, he played the Jets, but I don't know what happened there. I'm going to have to look at some of those red zone possessions. I think this is a little too low. My total's probably going to be, just check quick, but it'll be north of 45, I can tell you that, and it'll probably be a bet for me. Even with New England not having an identity, Cam was bad. Stidham isn't the answer, but yeah, they should be able to bounce back against a decent or a bad defense here.
The only, Milano played 19 snaps this week, as you said, like mostly in coverage. But the Bills have just not been able to stop the run for years. I mean, I remember the New Orleans game in 2017. I was on the Bills, and like all the New Orleans did, they had the Hall of Fame quarterback, and all they did was run the ball with Kamara and Ingram. It was like, I think that New England will have some opportunities there, and then Cam's not a guy. Like, I don't think Cam was nearly as good as he was the first 2 weeks. I don't think he's nearly as trash as he's been the last 3 weeks. And, Belichick, I think Belichick will scheme some things up to make Allen look poor. Allen's never played well against New England. So, but at the same time, he's so high variance that I don't think you can bet an under a low 40 total either.
Well, Rufus, I liked your kind of answer there in terms of there's a simple outlook to this in terms of Cam Newton drop in performance and what to make of that, and then to kind of pull things a little bit further out and look at the bigger picture. I guess that the question then is, for so many bettors that will bet week to week and not think about kind of samples of data or anything like that, and I mean, the NFL is so cyclical and it's difficult to kind of know when to draw the line. How big a sample are you looking at to make things become predictive or make them worthwhile taking note of to kind of add to your analysis?
So I don't think there isn't one threshold. It's like more data adds to what you know. And it's this sort of continuous process where you're refining your knowledge of a team based on what you've seen. And the more you see, the more predictive, the in-season is. And so, obviously, more recent weeks are worth more predictively than more distant weeks. But at the same time, there's still a lot of data that I think people are willing to throw away that they shouldn't be. So our idea of I mean, and the biggest example is Pryor's. I mean, I think people, when I know I freaking say Pryor's all the time, but literally, like, they have an impact throughout the entire season. How good Aaron Rodgers has been in his career, how good Drew Brees has been in his career, like Josh Allen, like that still matters to me, even in a playoff game, like how good they were in seasons, not this season, in previous seasons. So, so it's a continuous process.
Okay, we'll get on to our next game. Then we got the Las Vegas Raiders at the Cleveland Browns. Another move off the 3 here. It's quite interesting. Cleveland now -2.5. Another one with the drop in total, 55.5 down to 53.5. I think that the Browns have got a good record, but I think most people would know that there's more to it than a 5-2. OBJ now done for the season. Still favourites for this. Eric, does the fortunate run continue, or do the Raiders get the win here, do you think?
Yeah, I think I see it as, so I have the Raiders still as a below average team. I have Cleveland about a point better than the average team. So like I can sort of see where this is coming from. I think the matchups here, though, make it tough to bet Cleveland just because, they're so poor in the middle of the field, and the Raiders' best player is their tight end. And, so I can see why this total is in the 50s. I could, just because both defenses are really bad. So I don't know. This is one where I don't really have an opinion because I don't trust Cleveland to be able to stop anybody, but I also don't think the Raiders are as good fundamentally as Cleveland, and, playing on the road, sort of in what appears to be, a 10 o'clock, AM game for them. It's just, to me, I think there's just a lot of variables here that I probably just want to watch this game to sort of see, again, Cleveland do it again, because I just, like you, I just don't trust them.
Andy?
Yeah, West Coast team playing early game. I mean, that's a kind of a narrative we lean on sometimes. It's still not an easy spot for them playing the early game like that. Traveling, like you said, Cleveland is softer on the middle like me. They can be beaten. Their linebackers, they just got their ass beat by Joe Burrow. Again, he's playing well. We're seeing some glimpses. Both these rookie quarterbacks that we've seen in him and Herbert, we've seen some nice things, but it's still a rookie quarterback with a team that's halfway kind of quitting at points. Like the fact that they gave up that many points, especially that second half, the back and forth, that was maybe the most fun game especially if you didn't have any action on it. Just sit there.
Not if you were an under better.
Yeah, not if you were an under better. I bet the under in their first matchup, and I ended up, that probably kept me off this one because it was such an ugly feel. But, losing that was amazing. Like, I don't think Baker Mayfield's a great quarterback. He's a good quarterback. But to lose OBJ and then go on that kind of run he did, like, without your best receiver, to do what he did, whatever it was, like 20-some straight completions and just marching down the field every time his defense coughed one up. And it was something. So I have to give him some credit there. Losing OBJ is going to hurt, but it's still a team that they're going to be able to score on. It's not a good defense. Neither of these defenses is good. The under came through a little, I guess, kind of boneheaded move by me and Drew. We bet this over too early, and we have a bad number. And I guess if I learned anything from last week, I'm just going to go back to the well and take some more at the lower number, because I'm not going to sit through that again. I still like this as an overlook. The defense can get shredded. I didn't catch a ton of I keep writing Oakland in my notes, Las Vegas, but weird ejection. I don't know if you had any opinions on that. The stomp ejection, I didn't really see it. That was kind of goofy. Carr's aggressiveness, welcome change. Like, that's a super welcome change, especially if you're a Raiders fan. Like, just he turned into Alex Smith for a while, and that was ugly. So getting Ruggs and a good tight end and a decent running game, I guess, is maybe helping that. I don't know if so much of it, but a lot of it does have to be play calling. But overlook for me here, and I would probably still lean Cleveland a little. Not at this. If Oakland money, Las Vegas money comes in and it drops, I'd probably be interested in Cleveland. But at the current number, that's about where I make it.
Is Beckham really a huge difference maker?
Apparently not.
Baker's been at his best when his number 2 receiver was like Rashad Perriman, and the other day with Donovan Peoples-Jones and Rashard Higgins. So I think there's something to that, right? Like, I think there's something to having a wide receiver who's sort of like, it's kind of like with the running back with, McCaffrey. It's like if you waste downs on manufacturing touches for somebody, then you're not allowing your offense to be as sort of multiple as it can be. I don't know. I mean, my intuition would say it makes the offense worse, but we've only seen evidence that Cleveland's been a pretty good offense without him and a kind of a underachieving offense with him.
I mean, I think I'm not going to say wide receivers don't matter. I think there are very elite wide receivers do matter, and there are elite receivers that are clearly game changers. But I mean, just looking at sort of when receivers are injured and sort of the downgrade, I guess the value of a starting wide receiver over a backup just through the years of injury data, like wide receivers, like the second least valuable position on the offensive side of the field, actually on the whole football field behind running back. So I mean, I guess that kind of the OBJ thing, and you're right, as you said, like they have struggled with OBJ or Mayfield has over the years. But this game, I don't have an opinion here. I make it 1.9, so I would lean to Las Vegas, if anything. And the total I have spot on.
All right, well, I'll get us on to a game where you might have an opinion, Rufus. Jets at the Chiefs.
How did I
haven't I haven't looked into the Pinnacle database. I don't think we're quite at record numbers, but -20 on the Kansas Chiefs, pretty ridiculous. The total's been going back and forth around 48. It looks like it's gonna hang around there as well. The Chiefs are bad. The Jets are rubbish. Quite simple that way, but when it comes to the numbers here, Rufus, can you get on the Jets with 20 points?
So at 20, yes. But so I took a look ahead last week at I think 21 or 21, like 21 and a half. I mean, you can't get much down on those look aheads, unfortunately. But if you look at last week, I think the Jets were actually worse than the final score indicates. In fact, I have them as 12.8 points worse. Fundamentally, they were 5th percentile on offense in yards per play, 14th percentile in play success on offense, and the thing that's been hurting them a lot, like penalties, they actually benefited from. So they were penalized 57 fewer yards than Buffalo. So I think, believe it or not, I think the perception of the Jets based on that game is not actually correct. I think I still had them literally as 4th to last in the game grades. And so, believe it or not, my number for the Jets is actually closer to the market than it's been all season. I make this number 16.5, which, and so, yes, I like the Jets, but it's like a pretty marginal play.
Yeah. It gets tricky with these big totals, and this was a conversation that I could have had longer. It just didn't get deep enough with someone who bets baseball heavily, and I asked him, sometimes you're betting these -200s because you show value on the money line. Like, why don't you play run lines? And he says late in the game, a team with a great bullpen winning by 1 doesn't have an incentive to win by 2. Like, they don't care that I bet the run line. And you can get kind of into the same argument with the Chiefs up by 17 late. Like, when you're up by multiple scores late, you have no incentive to cover the spread for you. So I guess while they could win by 35, and that wouldn't surprise me, I usually stay away from these bigger ones because I'm always going to show some value on the dog, and in no way, shape, or form do I want to get involved in the Jets right here.
Andy,
I don't know what Crowder's going to be. That would be nice, but at the same time, this is rough.
Is the equivalent here betting like? I mean, would you consider betting like an alternate spread? Like a -7.5, minus whatever, 300. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of right. That is the equivalent of like, would you lay like -13.5 minus whatever instead? Because like if you break down the juice and turn it into probabilities, like I would think it'd probably be better value if you wanted to lay that and pay all that vig. It'd probably be better value than laying the 20.5. But at the same time, you'd have to look at the distribution of this game happening 1,000 times. there's a lot where they, again, if you have the ball late, you're up by 10 to 13. There's no incentive for you to drive down and score. It gets tricky on even over 2 touchdowns. Anything big, it gets a little tricky with end of game scenarios where you're like, well, my team clearly was the best. You can look at the box score and say they should have won by 25, but it doesn't really matter for your bet because the game script turns around on you when you have a big lead.
Do you think this is priced in to that number, or do you think? I mean, like, what would that number be if you knew that Kansas City was playing the game in sort of neutral game script the whole time? That's the question, and it's hard to know exactly because you don't have a lot of games.
It'd be big.
Sorry,
it would be big.
It would be a lot bigger, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
no, that's fair. I bet it is priced in. You're probably right.
I mean, I don't know if you guys like said it, but I have the Chiefs as like 9.5 points better than the average team, and the Jets 8 points worse. So you add in home field, like this number almost gets there, which is almost like never these big spreads almost always provide value for the underdog because you never actually get there with your power ranking. But in this case, so there's a couple of competing things. Like the Chiefs last week against Denver had their backup quarterback in there and scored, like legitimately drove the field and scored a touchdown and like did not relent on Denver, the division rival, all that kind of stuff. But in snow, there were some reasons to come back against the whole idea of like the Chiefs aren't going to try at the end of the game. They're going to win by 17 and yada, yada, yada. But on the other hand, I showed you this, Rufus, a couple weeks ago. There's evidence that Andy Reid doesn't actually produce his best work, let's say, in games not involving great teams. Like you look at like the scheme similarity, the scheme, uniqueness stuff, and it plateaus against teams like Baltimore, Pittsburgh, the New England Patriots, and it troughs out again, when the Chiefs go on these extended runs of games like they're currently in, which like Denver, Las Vegas, New York. And so like there's a ton of, there's actually statistical support that the Chiefs will do what it takes to win this game by 14, and that's it. And so it's really interesting. It's probably why I don't think I like either side of this one, even though, there's probably value on the Jets, but they're so explosive and the Jets can't score. That's the other thing. If this game's 24-0 at halftime, like, are you really going to bet the Jets second half? Like, I don't know if they can cross the goal line enough for this to, really be a thing I'm confident in.
Well, just to your point, Andy, I mean, it's something in terms of that establishing a lead and then playing safer or whatever it might be. Obviously, see it to a lesser extent in basketball. And I mean, even this weekend in sports like soccer, there is almost the motivation to go after your opponent. I think in the Dutch soccer league, someone won like 13-0 or something in the top division.
Yeah, Ajax won by a lot.
Yeah. But with the NFL, do you think is it the risk of injury is higher than other sports? Is it just like a cultural thing within the sport in terms of sportsmanship? What is it do you think actually causes that?
I mean, you saw like Ohio State. Oh, sorry, Andy.
No,
did you guys see Ohio State against Nebraska at the end of the game? Ohio State scored, and then the coach later apologized because the game was a blowout. And then you saw like UCF at the end, like they were up, 16, 17, something
That was the most merciful last drive I've ever seen.
Were you on Tulane?
I was on Tulane, yeah. Plus 21, yeah.
My bearded friend was on UCF there at minus 17.5. Like he got a great price, but they run a ball twice and then take a knee on third down. So it's like, I think part of it, like it's coaches' relationships and maybe who feels slighted. I also think, believe it or not, especially in college, coaches generally know what the spread is. I mean, you hear from boosters. They hear from boosters. Like I found like these big favorites cover by a lot more than you'd expect in college.
Yeah. There was that Notre Dame Florida State game where they went for it on fourth down when they were up. I think the spread was 19.5 and they were up by 16, and they ran the ball. They ran a sweep on fourth and goal from the 3, and they got stopped. And somebody, I can't remember who it was like a beat writer or somebody was like, yeah, Notre Dame tried to cover for the boosters, and it's like they must know that this is the thing.
The boosters are betting them every week, regardless, and the boosters are the guys who basically are deciding who the coach is because it's their money, right? So it's incentives, right? It's all about incentives.
Yeah. So that whereas that UCF game was great. They got if you were Tulane and you knew that you weren't going to stop UCF, they got just the right amount of yards to basically cover the number there. It was the most merciful thing I've ever seen, which is crazy given that UCF doesn't run the clock out. They don't they were throwing on that possession too. It was crazy.
But in this case, if I'm if I'm Andy Reid, I'm like, let's take it easy on Adam Gase. We want him to stay in the league as long as possible.
Adam Gase makes the spread between the best and the worst coach the biggest it could possibly be, which helps Andy Reid.
Right, back to the games. LA Rams at the Miami Dolphins. The Rams are favourites here, -4. Another total with a point coming off. 46 now, pretty evenly split there. This one, I think, before we get into the numbers, and Eric, I'll go over to you because I know you probably do a lot of analysis around the quarterbacks. Obviously, two are coming in for Fitzpatrick this week, I think. I'd be interested to know what you kind of do in this situation in terms of the relationship between your analysis and the betting. Is it something where you stay away because it's such an uncertainty, or is it something where you've got enough data there to maybe get involved when the rest of the market might be put off?
Yeah, well, we have college grades for quarterbacks. So one of the things that we do is we'll try to tease what that means out. But as we've talked about in this podcast before, I know Rufus, you do this as well, and I'm assuming Andy, you do it as well. It's you could use draft position too. You can use some sort of market-based analysis for how you would expect a quarterback of this draft position to perform. We like to, I would say, just for reference sake, we like to a less than Burrow, more than Herbert, but also less than Fields. Presumably the second quarterback that's going to be taken this next draft. So he's not a can't miss, but he's somebody who I think we have a good gauge on. When I look at this game, one of the things I find interesting about this game, Fitzpatrick last week against the Jets had the most turnover-worthy plays among any quarterback in the league. I think Tua provides a little bit more in the way of protecting the football, which I think might make Miami more valuable here against the number than I think people realize just for a random rookie quarterback.
Yeah, I don't do a good job of this. I will say my quarterback analysis coming out of college is horrid. Everyone I've ever liked has been terrible. Everyone I think is terrible has been good. I think I was probably down on Mahomes, Baker we yet to be seen.
I was down on Mahomes.
Yeah, it's super hard to do this. It's I used to do some really terrible modeling in the EPL, and my biggest stopper was when teams got promoted. How do I take data from the championship and use it in the EPL from last year? How do you take that prior? It's very similar. How do you take performance in some of these games they're playing? You take an Alabama game where they're playing Howard or Citadel. He played the first half and threw for 400 yards. What do you do with some of this stuff? I don't think they'd play him if that hip wasn't 100%. So I don't think that should be an issue. But at the same time, just kind of a pass for me without much knowledge on how he's going to fit into this. And it sounds like they're shopping Xavier Howard now. So
they just came out and said that was fake. Going on.
Oh, is it? Okay, good.
Yeah.
I would not do that.
This information campaign.
Yeah, they just signed him.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No.
I think when you look at this game, though, there's a lot to like about the Dolphins from a spot perspective. I mean, you're talking about I can't imagine this is the fairest thing that they've ever done. Miami coming off of a bye. The Rams are coming off of a Monday Night Football game at home, and traveling and playing obviously at 10 o'clock. There's a lot of things that not to like about the Rams here. The Tua thing throws a wrench in it, but I don't know. I still think the Rams are a little bit of a paper tiger relative to their record. So I don't know. The Tua thing is throwing me off a little bit, but I kind of do like the Dolphins as a concept going forward this season.
So I think, obviously starting Tua after the bye makes sense. You give him time to prep, but with Ryan Fitzpatrick, we know he's a high variance quarterback, and the argument here that Tua is going to be a lower variance quarterback, that's not what you want for a game when you're not expected to win. This is the game you need Fitzpatrick for. You want to start Tua when the Dolphins are playing the Jets, because Fitzpatrick is going to Fitzpatrick. He's going to make those turnover-worthy throws, and he's going to make those great throws, and he's just going to,
He's going to keep both teams in the game.
Exactly. he could be really good. He could be really bad. He's the next. Well, he learned from Jameis Winston, or maybe Jameis Winston learned from him in Tampa. I don't know which way it went, but because of that, I think. And the other thing is that this is to his first start ever. And if you look, I mean, he could be, he could end up being Peyton Manning. But look at Peyton Manning, his first start. Look at Peyton Manning his first year, 3-13 with the Colts. I mean, it takes. And now, obviously, it's a little bit different now. Quarterbacks are a little bit more NFL ready after when they enter the league. But at the same time, first start, I think it's more of a downgrade than most people think, and I make this number 6.
Right, I'm conscious. Got one eye on the time, and also a couple more games to get through. I'll pick some out of what we've got left. Saints at the Bears. The early money not enough to move the traders on their early lines at the moment. They're stuck pretty much on -4 on the Saints and a 45.5 point total. I think you mentioned it early on, Rufus, that patience is kind of running out on the Saints. A win, but they failed to cover. Is this one, are you keeping faith with them here? Do you like them at -4?
I haven't bet it yet. I make it -6.6, but yeah, it's Saints have been frustrating, but I still think they're a better team than the market does.
Yeah, the defense is leaving something to be desired, but man, Foles might not be it. And something I hadn't really noticed, and playing who they played last week or yesterday will kind of bring that out. The Bears O-line is kind of sneaky bad. Like that, I think Foles got sacked 3-4 times, just constant pressure. Not only pressure, but getting in the backfield on run plays. It was a problem. Like the game, I bet the under, and the script did not go how I thought it would go. I'm glad it still came through, but Chicago has some issues. They had some like flash plays. Eddie Jackson, Roquan Mack, like they had good individual plays, but as a whole, the defense wasn't great. And it's funny because it's the tiniest sample possible, but the perfect sample. The Leonard Floyd, Robert Quinn flip, that looks stupid now. Like that looked really stupid in just the your tiny little sample of that game. So I'm probably lowering the Bears a little more, even though I still like the defense. The play calling is just so atrocious, and I hate backing New Orleans anymore. But I make this like 5.
Yeah, the same thing that Rufus just said about Foles, about Fitzpatrick relative to Tua, I think is the same about Trubisky relative to Foles. I mean, Foles just doesn't give you that upper tier play anymore, and he doesn't give you like the backbreaking things that Trubisky does. But I think against a team like New Orleans, like I'd probably rather have Mitch in there just because he's able to produce some stuff down the field. I think New Orleans at some point their defense is going to round into form. This might be it. And I can't support Chicago here. I make it a 4.5. So, I guess I'd lean New Orleans too.
Guys, really quickly. So New Orleans is last in the NFL in penalty yard differential. But the incredible thing is, so second to last is the Ravens at -104 yards. New Orleans is -318 yards. So they're 200 yards more. The difference between them and Baltimore is greater than the difference between the second to last team and the third best team. Like it's just to maybe that's probably part of the reason I still like the Saints so much. That's just not sustainable. Like there's not a lot of historical precedent for it.
Right, I've got 2 more on the board that I think are probably worth covering for us. 49ers at the Seahawks. Interest, I think, in this one, San Francisco +4 down to +3. Bettors are pretty split on the total at the moment. It's on 54. I think we got here a case of contrasting records in the NFC West. 2 teams that are probably also or were on the opposite ends of the expectation spectrum have kind of flipped that around. The Seahawks, can they keep up the good start? Andy, do you think there's plenty of reasons for people to buy into them, but do they do it at this number, I guess is the question.
Yeah, don't have a strong opinion on the side. I do like this total. My numbers and just anecdotally some things would probably like an under here. Seattle's defensive secondary is maybe driving this number up, or where it opened. Like, they truly have a bad secondary. They have a bad pass defense. But I don't know if the Niners are just set. The current health situation that the Niners have, they're getting healthier, but they're not set up to just go up and down the field on this team like this. So I probably don't. I'd have to run it, but I'm not going to come up to 54. I'd lean under here. I bet Seattle last week. Didn't feel good about that game once we got towards the end. That was kind of a gross. Just the penalties really bit them in that game. The three,
Yeah.
the leverage, the roughing, and then the holding on the touchdown, which that one was fair, but the other two were so gross. So I feel like they probably should have won that game by 7 and covered for me. I make this like a little over 3, slight edge, I suppose. Well, it's a juice 3, so my number's probably right on market, but I am slightly to the under here. I think San Francisco is a better defense than the Cardinals, and will be able to limit Russ a little bit more than he was last Sunday night. So 54, I'm probably going to look at this under once I dig into a few more things.
Yeah, I mean, Seattle's defense is otherworldly bad, and I don't know if Jamal Adams is worth as much as people think. Shaquille Griffin was injured. I think that kind of impacted it even more. They already don't have a nickel that they trust. So, the Niners do have some playmakers on the outside. It does seem like their running back, like their running game, is explosive, which I think could help them get to this total. But I'm sort of going to lay off this game. I think it'll be an interesting game to watch for sure, because if the Niners win, then you're talking about 4 teams in that division with 5 wins or more. And Seattle no longer being sort of a lock to win the thing. If Seattle wins, it kind of puts some distance between them and the former division. So there's a lot riding on this game. And I think the Niners have a ton of tactical advantages, but I don't know on offense if they have this sort of the schematic, or the sort of I don't know if they're the type of offense that can move up and down the field with Seattle.
So I actually took San Francisco plus 3.5. I've been pretty high on them in general. Not factoring in the Super Bowl hangover letdown thing, but I also lean towards the under. I make it just a little over 50. So.
All right, well, I think we got probably the best till last. We get on to our last game to cover. Pittsburgh Steelers at the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously a massive game. Traders put it up at -5.5 on Baltimore. It's now -3.5 and still trending down. 3 points off the total as well, 49 down to 46. Well, Pittsburgh looked better than last season. Baltimore probably don't look as good. Andy, I'm gonna start with you, because I think you like Pittsburgh this season, don't you? You got a vested interest in how they get on. What do you reckon is going to happen here?
Yeah, and that's what's tough with me every week, when it's like, man, am I still just high on this team? And am I getting rewarded and getting all this confirmation bias because they keep winning games, and maybe not in super dominant fashion, but they get it done? So I passed on the early number, and I regret it now because they took number. The number's probably where it should be now, all things considered. Baltimore is off a bye. Baltimore's at home. It's not some coaching mismatch. Tomlin, I'd say Piers at least. I like Harbaugh quite a bit. Tomlin's in-game stuff, I've been on record saying, isn't great, but he's still a very good coach. It's a very good roster. And boy, Christ, they look good in the first half. Like, just everything was so efficient. Just I can't imagine. I don't have what their play success was in the first half, but it was high. And we're just converting every single third down. I mean, right there, that's a successful play. And just taking what the other team is giving him. It doesn't matter if Big Ben is over the hill. If he can always hit this short crossing stuff, or he has so many weapons. I might still look at some Pittsburgh money line. I don't know if I needed the points. I don't know if we're going to get a terribly close game. I'm not super keen on Baltimore's defense at times. The secondary's great. It can be ball hawking if you want to go deep. But I think they're going to be able to do the same thing they did to Tennessee on offense, Pittsburgh, that is. So should be a good one. It'll probably be Pittsburgh or nothing for me. The total, Lord knows what to do with these, just based off, well, some of the second half performances from both of these teams. If you want to say what Baltimore had with the Eagles and what Pittsburgh had last week, where they really, really sit on it in the second half, but also on the defensive side early. So I'm not comfortable getting involved in the total at all here. It's come down.
Yeah. We talked about this on I think a DM, Andy. I think if the Ravens, I think, have some tactical advantages here in game with Harbaugh taking all 4 downs when he needs them. Their kicking game is way more reliable than any other kicking game in the NFL, I would say. Especially in field goals. Lamar Jackson, when you look at the way in which Pittsburgh went after the run against Derrick Henry, I don't think that it's going to work against the Baltimore Ravens when the quarterback can pull the ball and run, and get 15 yards at a time. A lot of Jackson's been limited by health over the past few weeks. I think that is abated a little bit by the bye. And when you look at Pittsburgh, the way that they want to run offense, I think can work against a defense like Tennessee, which is playing back because they're afraid of being beat for the big play. The Ravens are a team that's sort of daring you to make a big play by rushing. These defenses are, I think, mirror images of each other, and it's harder for a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers, which relies, I think, on crossing the street 10 times to get to the end zone. It works against teams like Tennessee. I don't think it works as much against Baltimore. So I don't know if I support necessarily this move on Pittsburgh. I think I like the Ravens more than I like, especially at this number of -3.5.
I think you're muted, Rufus.
Crap, I was muted.
You probably said something smart there.
Yeah, I'm never going to get to say that again in the same way. But I've been high on Pittsburgh all season, and I actually kind of lean Baltimore here, surprisingly. So I think they're coming off the bye. As you said, Lamar Jackson, he had been not running the ball for a few weeks, and now it seems. I mean, you expect he'll be a little healthier, but I mean, Baltimore. I just think that this movement is. I mean, there's a lot of momentum on Pittsburgh here. Public momentum, sharp momentum. I don't know what it is exactly, but I make the number Baltimore -4.3. So I'm laying off, but I didn't really totally understand the move, and definitely didn't sort of expect it.
All right, we'll call it a day there. That's it for today's show. Plenty of insight and some intriguing analysis, as always, from Andy, Eric, and Rufus. I know you guys are very busy. I know, Rufus, you're being overly committed this week and dialing in from Vegas. So I just want to say thanks to all of you for taking the time out and sharing your wisdom with our listeners.
I didn't want to miss you guys' beautiful faces.
Thank you to everyone else for tuning in. If you do want to check all the latest odds and get involved in the action, then head over to pinnacle.com and remember to always gamble responsibly.